Gospel according to St. John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From this fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." The Holy Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Our hymn of the day is hymn number 531. Let's get the right key. The trumpets sound, the angels sing, the feast is ready to begin. The gates of heaven are open wide, and Jesus welcome you inside. Sing with thankfulness on the purity light. Come and revel in heaven's love and light. Sing your praise at the table of the King. The feast is ready to begin. The feast is ready to begin. Tables are laid and with things. Oh, his love, peace and joy he brings. He'll fill you up with love divine. He'll turn your water into wine. Sing with thankfulness songs of purity light. Come and revel in heaven's love and light. Take your place at the table of the King. The feast is ready to begin. The feast is ready to begin. The hungry heart is satisfied. Offers up for his paradise. Now hear, O heaven and earth adore the amazing goodness of the Lord. Sing with thankfulness on the purity light. Come and revel in heaven's love and light. Take your place at the table of the King. The feast is ready to begin. The feast is ready to begin. Oh, you ain't carrying me over there?
No. But you can hang on.
No, I'm better off with the canes.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert. Well, Good morning. Good morning. It is so good to be with you today. We have had an opportunity over the last days of this Christmas season in 2019 and now into 2020 to hear and learn and grow in the celebration of God's great and good gifts for all people. We're told in our readings today that is the case. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament reading in Jeremiah today. He's the one who came and brought the people from the north back. All of his success with the Samaritans in the northern kingdom of Israel brought those people back into the fold of God's people. And so it's really good for us to know that these were the kinds of things that God had in mind, not only for his children in Jerusalem and in Israel in the north, but for all of us, for every single one of us in this Christmas season. And those things bring us, this gift of Jesus Christ brings us to faith, hope, and joy in our lives, no matter what we're facing. Last night was an awful night. Just ask Trisha Don, or talk to me. We had very different nights in our own homes, but they weren't very good nights. I got about 2 hours of sleep last night. So if you hear me fumbling on the keyboard today, you'll know why. I'm just trying to keep the eyes focused. Trisha had sick dogs at her house last night. She was up half the night with her animals at home. But what are we doing today? In the face of that, we are still here celebrating and rejoicing together in the gift, the greatest gift of God's goodness for all of creation. And our lessons today tell us about that too. Christ didn't just come to redeem you and me. He came to redeem all of creation. It's going to be really interesting to see how that all unfolds when Christ returns. Because right now it's kind of hard to comprehend. You don't want to live in Australia right now. Or maybe not even New Zealand because of all the ash and smoke sifting into New Zealand from the massive fires in Australia. When Jesus says he's going to redeem everything, how about the 490 billion animals that have been lost in Australia to fire? 490 billion. We thought the wildfires in California were terrible, and they were, but they were nothing compared to what's happening in Australia today. How is Christ going to redeem all of that? How is he going to make all of that right? I want to be present with Christ in God's heavenly kingdom, to watch the glory of that unfold, to see all people who have known Christ in their lives, that they might be restored from the grave, from the life they're living on earth, and all the animals of creation which have been destroyed by what we think is global warming in the world today. Jesus is going to reveal to all people how God's abounding grace will heal the brokenness, the sickness, the illness of us and of all creatures and of the earth itself and all of creation. It's beyond our thinking. You know, I can get out about as far as the moon, and then I handle that pretty well, but when you start talking to me about some nebula that's 450 light years away that may be in the process of being destroyed by its star, which is breaking down and causing devastation, even that is in the hands of God for the restoration of all things by Jesus Christ. Kind of difficult to understand, isn't it? Let me tell you, I'm ready to have my back and my hip restored. I'm tired of walking around with a couple of canes. Right now it's my reality for, I hope, only a few more weeks. But Christ is going to restore that for all of us. He's going to put us back in the place in which God has always intended us to be, which is wholeness and health, which is faithfulness, which is tender and generous hearts, which is to live knowing that we are constantly cared for no matter what happens to us. That is the message of God's grace through the gift of the Savior in Bethlehem. Today we read about the wise men coming and bringing gifts, and we brought, I don't know how many years ago, Debbie and Sharon bought me the 3 gifts the wise men brought. The kids were all happy. I said, yeah, I have real gold in my office. And they kind of, really? And I said, I have frankincense and myrrh. That meant much less to them. It was that real gold. And then they saw those little micro-ounce chips of gold and fluid in a bottle in the chest that we brought in. How much is it worth? It was worth the saving of Jesus Christ from the wrath of the world. At the time, Herod was prepared to destroy all children who were 2 and younger. It was the greatest gift of people that was possible to be made. You and I have the opportunity. I know this is the last day of Christmas. We're going to come in next Sunday. We're going to, I missed the lighted wreaths and the trees and the extra. The crush will still be there. It will stay there during the entire season after Epiphany. Because it says that the wise men came to a home, not to a stable. It says they came to the house where Mary and Joseph and Jesus were. So it must have been some time after maybe Mary and Joseph finally got settled in with relatives who had space left after all the other relatives left. You know, maybe their spare room was not full anymore, and Mary and Joseph were able to be with them. Prior to their arrival, very late in Bethlehem on that night in which Jesus was born, people's homes were filled to overflowing with relatives, and every inn was full. So here the wise men come. We don't have our camel up here yet, do we? Our camel usually comes up for Epiphany. What's that camel's name? How many of you remember? Hashmakaka. Hashmakaka is the camel. It's about this big. He's a big store display camel. He'll come out next week because we really celebrate the wise men having made it after having visited Herod and then discovering in a dream, we must assume God sent a message either via a dream or angels to the wise men not to go back and see Herod, because God was bent on protecting this goodness that he had sent into the world for all people. And he was not about to let the life of this Christ, this Messiah, be destroyed before it was time. It sounds a little strange, doesn't it? But the world of Jesus had to come to know who he was, what God was capable of, how much God loved them, and how willing God was to give his very best for the very worst in people. That's probably the greatest message you and I have, that every day should bring us joy in our baptisms. As that in the worst of who we are, God continues to pour out his best for us. No wonder we have joy and we have growing faith. And we celebrate again today the gift of the birth of the Savior of all things. Because no matter who we are, as believers, the best of God has been poured, its life's blood has been poured out for us. His life's blood has been poured out for us at just the right time, in exactly the right way, because the goodness of God has been intended to save us all. Hard to think about that little one who's born, who grows up to be a great person. But that's exactly what we're talking about. I told Melody we should show the video of the young Jesus to the Sunday school classes. I don't know how many of you have ever seen that. We've recorded it at home off of Netflix, I believe. And it kind of reveals that Jesus was a bit of a corker. He almost had to be, didn't he? Once he began to discover who he was and what authority and power he had, it took the mediation and love of his parents to keep that under wraps and to keep it in the control in which it was meant to be kept. for the goodness of all people. That's why Mary and Joseph, people of great faith, strong, down-to-the-earth people, were chosen to raise God's Son, because of what they could bring to his life, the faithfulness that they could instill in him. Today we try to do the same thing with our youth, the children in our homes. We try to instill that faith. And when they're corkers, I suspect we get as angry as Joseph must have gotten in his carpenter shop with Jesus. But I'll tell you what, it would have been really nice to have a kid who could lengthen that fourth leg on the table just a half inch so that the table would stand square on the floor. Ever think about that? Have you ever tried to make a four-leg table? Doesn't work very often, does it? They're usually tippy and not where they belong. Just think, Joseph, he became a master carpenter when Jesus was a little kid, because Jesus could fix the problems. Just like Jesus fixes the problems in our lives. Maybe not by taking them away, but by being in the midst of us and enfolding us with the goodness of God's love for our lives. May the end of this Christmas season find you in greater joy than you had at its beginning. May your faith grow ever stronger. And may your gentleness and kindness be a sign of the presence of Jesus Christ in your lives. In his name, amen.